someone who can think up a speech on a whim. In addition to the speech projects in the Competent Communicator and Advanced Communication Series manuals and the leadership projects in the Competent Leadership Manual, Toastmasters International offers about 30 instructional projects in the Better Speaker Series, Successful Club Series, and the Leadership Excellence Series. This evening, Lloyd will present Controlling Your Fear from the Better Speaker Series. He considers this the most important project in that series, and that's because at one time or another, sometimes in minor and sometimes in major ways, everyone who gets up in front of an audience, all of the Toastmasters world champion public speakers, all of you, me, everyone, most definitely Lloyd, already has or eventually will experience fear during a speech. The saying about fear that we hear in Toastmasters is that you will never eliminate the butterflies, but you can make them fly in formation. The way to do that is to apply some simple practical ways that all of us can use to reduce the fear we feel when we speak. Lloyd Smith, Controlling Your Fear.
You may have seen stories saying that there's research that shows that people are actually more afraid of public speaking than they are of dying. In other words, at a funeral, they'd rather be the person in the coffin than the one giving the eulogy. That seems kind of unlikely to me, but public speaking really does rank up there with the fears. It's right up there with snakes and spiders and excessive heights and that kind of thing. Well, there's bad news and there's good news about fear in public speaking. The bad news is that you can't get rid of it. It's hardwired into our physiology. In fact, if you say you never feel fear when you're in front of an audience, there may well be something medically wrong with you and you probably should get to your doctor. What it amounts to, fear, or there's a technical term for it too, but it's called a lot of things, stage fright, performance anxiety, and like that. It derives from our fight or flight response as human beings. Back when Thag the caveman heard a bush rustling, he had to wonder whether it was a squirrel or a saber-toothed tiger, and he had to be ready for either one. If you've ever startled a dog or a cat and seen how they jump up, run a little bit, then turn, and bare their fangs at you, well, they're getting ready to either run away or fight, depending on what seems to be the best idea at the time. The bad news for us is that when we get that in standing in front of a crowd, it's a release of adrenaline into our body. And that adrenaline causes the symptoms that a lot of people feel. Sometimes it's trembling of the hands, shaking of the knees. Sometimes your voice rises in pitch. Sometimes you see people start to flush, their neck or their face starts to flush. Sometimes they can't breathe correctly. You can tell they're right on the edge of hyperventilating. There are all kinds of symptoms of that. Luckily, there are 2 or 3 things that anybody can do at any time to at least alleviate that a little bit. I'd like to talk about those tonight. First one is preparation. If you know what you're talking about, the odds are you're going to give a pretty good speech. And that's especially true if it's related to something connected to your job or a hobby you're really deeply involved in or something like that. There's a very good chance that if you got up here and started talking about a feature of your job, you know more than anybody else in this room about that. You are the expert. And so you don't need to worry much. It's likely that everybody else will say, oh, yeah, that's interesting when you're done. That's especially true if you're talking about something that's somewhat technical, at least if you can explain it to us, people who don't know anything about it. So that kind of thing is important. You got to know what you're talking about. When you're writing your speech, whether or not you type it up or just do an outline, whatever works for you is what you ought to do, you got to make sure that it makes sense and then go through it a few times to make sure that your timing is okay. Worrying about the timing, especially in this context of our club, is one of the things that causes the most worry for people. It's hard to get timing until you have quite a bit of experience. Once you have that experience, you can get a sort of an internal clock and you'll know. But before that, you don't. Sometimes you get a bad surprise. Like 2 minutes of material when you see the yellow light or something, and then you got a problem. You have to turn the handle a little faster, I guess. So the preparation is important. The next thing might sound a little bit weird, but it's visualization. Have you ever seen on TV athletes, in fact I saw it yesterday, some snowboarders in the Olympics near the top of their run, and they were sitting there with their eyes closed, you know, doing kind of like this. Well, they were doing that visualization. And the idea is to see yourself doing whatever it is that you're getting ready to do. In the case of the speech, for example, you want to see yourself walking to the front of the room. You want to see yourself shaking hands with the Toastmaster. You want to see the happy and excited faces of the audience as they hang on your every word while you're doing it, and all the way right to the end. If you can do that, you're more likely to have the thing that you have visualized or seen. I do that for all of my contest speeches. At the district contest level, I always skip the business meeting, go to my hotel room, and just sit there with my eyes closed, visualizing my speech. I don't go through the speech. I don't practice it. By then it's too late. I've either got it or I haven't got it. But I watch it as if I were watching a video of it in my mind. Now, it sounds a little weird, but it works. Works for me. When I get up on the platform, I know who I'm going to look at right away. I know what I'm going to say. I know pretty much how it's going to go. The magic doesn't always work, but it certainly makes the speech seem like it's just something I've already watched, so I just do it. And you can too. The third thing I'd like to mention are some small, seemingly small things that you can do while you're standing up if you start getting the symptoms of the stage fright. The first one deals with a little bit of preparation. You should not drink hot or cold things before you give a speech. The reason is it affects your vocal cords. It can tighten them up. The best thing to drink, believe it or not, is room temperature water. It's not refreshing at all, but it will moisten your vocal cords a little bit without the effect on your voice. You've got to remember to breathe too. Now that sounds a little weird, but it's very, very easy to be going along, especially if you're a little concerned, and let your last gasp get out and then, you know, like that. You sometimes hear speakers do that. If you ever took band or choir when you were in school, they probably harped continuously on the idea of, you know, keeping your posture upright and breathing regularly and like that. Well, it's the same reason. You have to do that. The air is the power. That's what makes the words. And if you're not taking it in correctly, you won't be able to make the words. So just some regular breathing will work. You have to move around a little bit too. If you start to feel your hands shake or your knees trembling and try to stand still and power through it, you'll actually make it worse. The adrenaline in your body has to go somewhere. It has to do something. It has to be, in effect, burned up. And the way to do that is moving around just a little bit, even some small movements, just some gestures or step side to side will work. But the more you try to stop any of the symptoms, the worse they will all get. Now, a piece of good news, well, two pieces of good news. First of all, everybody in the audience wants you to do a good job. I mean, nobody comes here thinking, boy, I hope I hear a really crappy, boring speech tonight. You know, everybody wants to hear something good. And so everybody's on your side. You don't need to worry about being attacked or anything. The other thing is these stage fright symptoms that seem so horrible and overwhelming while you're actually experiencing them are most of the time invisible to the audience. You know, the other people say, well, my knees were just shaking, and they probably weren't. I mean, well, they may not have been. It might have been an illusion, but they weren't doing it to the extent that it would be visible to a crowd. If you do those things, you may allay the stage fright. But the main thing is, if you're prepared, if you have a topic you know about, if you think a little bit about moving around, you're probably going to be okay. That's because